But now we come to chapter 19 of Beren and Lúthien. I am aware that this is a story that's very personally important to Tolkien, and I am sure, without getting into the details of exactly how it came to be and what represents what and who represents who here, that there are some personal elements that explain some of the odder parts of the story. Now, to a certain extent, I think that you're looking at a very real looking myth here. And what I mean is a myth like myths told in surviving ancient and medieval sources, because there are so many elements that I think mean something to him personally, that he's just decided have to be there and have probably survived over decades of him editing it, that they don't obviously make sense from a, getting from point A to point B to point C of a story perspective, right? Myths often have more dream logic. Why did so and so do this? Why is there this weird restriction on this or that? Why is there this loophole on this or that? And those loopholes, those restrictions are often there in dreams, they're often there in myths. This story, in a lot of ways, doesn't work that well as a logical story going from A to B to C. It does seem to me to participate pretty well in that kind of dream or myth logic. He mentions many times the quote lay of Lúthien, off quote. I've always hated the word lay as a noun, meaning poem, because no normal person uses it. So I never use it in translating, the names of poems in the Poetic Edda, Thrymskvila, the Lay of Thrym, or something like that. It just drives me crazy as a word that's not normal. I understand that as a cognate to German Lied, it's not a foreign word in English, but it's not a normal word either. So I don't know. I rebel against it. Um, we see lots of myth logic here right from the beginning when Gorlim is captured by Sauron, and Gorlim says uh, that he, quote, should find Elinel again and with her be set free, off quote. Of course, immediately when he asks that it's going to be a monkey's paw, uh, that she must be dead. That's why Sauron agrees to it. Of course, Sauron gets the information out of him that he wants and then kills him. Um, Speaking of dreams, there is a dream here in which Beren gets a message. Quote, then Beren was aware in his dream of a form that came to him across the water, and it was a wraith of Gorlim, and it spoke to him, declaring his treachery and death, and bade him make haste to warn his father, off quote. Dreams are usually true in Norse myths and sagas, but people don't trust them, right? The classic thing in an Icelandic saga is someone says, I dreamed that I was attacked by five wolves on my way to the neighbor's house. Someone else says, well, that's because you're going to be attacked by these five guys on the way to your neighbor's house. And he says, no, I can't mean that. And then he gets killed by those five guys on the way to his neighbor's house. So Tolkien does depart from the Norse tradition there, and does something quite different. Um, I had to think about Luke Skywalker, with Beren showing up to find his father dead and then burying him. Right, not too different from Luke coming back to find his Uncle Owen and Aunt Beru, and then the orcs uh, chase him and shoot their arrows at him, and they miss him. So they're stormtroopers, right? So Tolkien was anticipating that by some decades. We get werewolves mentioned again, and what exactly Tolkien is picturing here, as I said before, I don't know, although he clarifies that they're, quote, fell beasts inhabited by dreadful spirits that he had imprisoned in their bodies, off quote. I don't know what a dreadful spirit is. Is that a person's dreadful spirit, an orc's dreadful spirit, some other disembodied dreadful spirit? I don't know how you imprison a spirit. This doesn't clarify anything to me. I don't know what a werewolf is, but it doesn't seem to be, teenage werewolf in London type. werewolf. It doesn't seem to be, werewolf type werewolf from the MST3K movie. I don't know what they really are. We see a very clear demonstration of how Tolkien, or Old English or Old Norse, doesn't necessarily mean something negative with the word doom when we're reminded that there is a quote great doom that lay upon. Um, I suppose it's Beren on page 155 in this edition. Good reminder that doom doesn't necessarily mean something bad for him. And it certainly doesn't in Old Norse, right? Domr dödan quer, the reputation of someone dead. Doom often leaning sort of toward reputation in Old Norse and often towards something like fate in Tolkien's work. Beren first sees Lúthien when she's dancing, and she dances and sings a lot in this chapter. I just wanted to note how often elves and Valar, whatever Tom Bombadil's wife is in Lord of the Rings, how often that's just what they're doing, right? This is how women pass their time, at least noble women and elf women and maybe Valar women pass their time in the Tolkien universe. They're always singing and dancing, way more than any that I know. Um, I suppose Middle Earth is full of Dua Lipas and aspiring ones, but it's just like I don't know what the thing is with all the dancing and singing. It seems to be sort of the default thing. If they're not doing something else, it's what they're doing. Um, like with the story about Maeglin, some questions, although it seems a little bit clearer here than there about how marriage works and what the conception of marriage is in this universe. Um, Given that Thingol asks Beren why he uh, will, quote, come hither as a thief, off quote, meaning thief of his daughter. So there we have that notion that marriage is a pact, a pledge, a wed, as I discussed the etymology of that word earlier in the same video, between families. Um, Here, that seems a little bit clearer than it does in the Maeglin story. I thought that it was interesting to note the difference in language between different people when addressing different people, because just earlier in this chapter, Sauron used a thou in talking to um, Gorlim. Here, Thingol uses you in talking to Beren. I don't know if that's supposed to mean that Sauron talks in a more old-fashioned way, or if that Sauron is actually being demeaning to Gorlim by using that singular familiar thou, and that the use of you is supposed to read as more formal and equitable here. I don't know. I am sure that it's something intentional because Tolkien seems to do everything very intentionally, but I'm not sure which intention. Um, we get more of this obsession with names when Thingol insults Beren and he answers, quote, death you can give me earned or unearned, but the names I will not take from you of baseborn, nor spy, nor thrall, off quote. So being named those things, not just, called, but always this use of the word name for something that somebody is called that impacts their reputation, right? And being called baseborn or spy or thrall, those are all things that might be spread around about you that might become part of your name, your domr in an Old Norse sense of that word, your reputation. And that's sort of magical, right? Your name is part of your destiny. It's something spoken into being that is likely to come true. You must resist it when people call you things that are not true or that are demeaning. We have more of the classic thing that happens all the time in Tolkien and in Norse literature, where anybody who is wise in any respect is also kind of a prophet. Melian says, quote, not by you shall Beren be slain, and far and free does his fate lead him in the end. Yet it is wound with yours. Take heed. Off quote. It's, as Robinson Jeffers says in a very different context, it's enough knowledge of the future to share it, but not enough knowledge of the future to be helpful. And it's like, well, if you know that, then you know more, don't you? Why don't you tell me how it's wound up with him so I don't make a big mistake, but they never really know enough. A little bit more about marriage. Uh, Beren, when he's agreed to go get a Silmaril for Lúthien, he says, quote, for little price do elven kings sell their daughters, off quote. Now, that may not sound very nice in a modern context, but of course, again, a wedding is a pact between families, and money and goods are exchanged as part of it. In fact, today, the typical word in Icelandic, not that I'm the best testament to the most modern Icelandic, but it is certainly a modern Icelandic word for marriage. And I think the most typical word is brúðkaup, right? The buying of a bride. That goes way, way back. Obviously, people aren't doing that in Iceland today, but it reflects the etymology of the word reflects a real old tradition that there's an exchange of goods between families, right? There's a bride price, a dowry. Um, we get more of just how much it means that someone has taken an oath, and this notion it's really clear through this whole section of how an oath is almost a character, right? An oath is a thing that interacts with and influences what people can do. Um, Felagund says, quote, it is plain that Thingol desires your death, but it seems that this doom goes beyond his purpose and that the oath of Feanor is again at work. For the Silmarils are cursed with an oath of hatred, and he that even names them in desire moves a great power from slumber, and the sons of Feanor would lay all the elf kingdoms in ruin rather than suffer any other than themselves to win or possess a Silmaril, for the oath drives them. And now Celegorm and Curufin are dwelling in my halls, and though I, Finarfin's son, am king, they have won a strong power in the realm and lead many of their own people. They have shown friendship to me in every need, but I fear that they will show neither love nor mercy to you if your quest be told. Yet my own oath holds, and thus we are all ensnared. Off quote. So you swore an oath, it's going to have effects you don't even anticipate because that oath is a thing. It is a bond upon you. The sons of Feanor have sworn an oath, which is a bond upon them and upon all of us. Um, this oath. I had to go back and look up what that oath was, but this oath upon Iluvatar that the everlasting dark would take them if they did not pursue anyone of any kind who should take or keep a Silmaril from their possession. And then uh, Felagund is also restrained by an oath. They're all ensnared by oaths. This attitude toward oaths that it's morally good to keep them, but often keeping them also is a disaster that has repercussions that you don't anticipate because taking an oath is almost magical. It's almost a blessing or a curse. Um, very, very familiar from Norse literature too, right? Where often it's oaths that cause the tragedy, cause the drama, as they do in Volsungs, for instance, Brynhild's oath that she'll marry no one but the man who knows no fear, and then having quote unquote to kill Sigurdur because he was the man who knew no fear and she wasn't married to him. Another reminder of Volsungs, by the way, when Sauron imprisons Beren and company in a pit, and there is a werewolf that devours the companions one by one. Of course, the same thing happens in Volsungs, where Sigurd's mother devours Sigmundur and his brothers when they are imprisoned by Sigurd, and Sigurd's mother is a wolf, or magically takes the form of a wolf. We get this character of Huan, which I assume is the most popular character in the Silmarillion of 2025 because people are obsessed with dogs. Um, a lot of stuff about his fate, page 163 of this edition. Quote, it was decreed that he should meet death, but not until he encountered the mightiest wolf that would ever walk the world. Off quote. Who decreed it? I don't know, but someone decreed it. Those words became magical, binding upon him. Also, quote, it was permitted to him thrice only ere his death to speak with words, off quote. Why just three times? Very dream logicy, very myth logicy, right? Doesn't really work in a modern storytelling sense because it's like, why? Who did this? But in a that feels very much like a real myth to me. That's sort of just very arbitrary restriction. It's there because it's there. The DM behind the scenes, um, you know, assigned it that way. This is what we need for story purposes. More Volsungs like action where Beren or no Felagund breaks out when they're imprisoned by Sauron and quote wrestled with the werewolf and slew it with his hands and teeth off quote. Just about the same thing with Sigmundur and Saga of the Volsungs, except the wolf is uh, uh, well, this is preceded by Sigmundur being covered by honey. Read my translation of the Saga of the Volsungs if you don't know the story. It's weird. Very strange fight between Sauron and the dog Huon. We read that Sauron took the form of a werewolf. Again, what does that mean? It seems to just mean a wolf. Um, he also, quote, shifted shape from wolf the serpent and from monster to his own accustomed form, off quote. Monster, what? I don't know. Should be picturing Godzilla, Frankenstein. I'm not really sure. Um, I thought that it was interesting after all of the uh, adventure around Sauron the werewolf. Beren and Lúthien have this little house of melanspale of peace, and we read, "quote You must choose Beren between these two to relinquish the quest in your oath, etc., etc." Off quote. I thought that it was interesting that it was even suggested by Lúthien that Beren could relinquish an oath. I'm not sure that's possible, and from the perspective of medieval literature, I'm not sure it's possible from the perspective of Tolkien's writing. Um, of course, he doesn't, but I wonder if it was actually contemplated as something real, or just like it's almost saying like this is impossible. Your only choice really is to try to hold it. And I think Horufin, when he says to Beren, quote, "go hence unto a swift and bitter death," off quote, I think that curse works. Spoiler alert, a little bit later in this chapter. It just doesn't happen soon. But once Beren's death comes, it is relatively swift and certainly bitter. And by the way, Huon bringing a herb to Lúthien to heal Beren. Saga of the Volsungs again, when Sigmundur and Sinfiotli fight as wolves. So there we have again the wolf element that's kind of in common between Volsungs and Beren and Lúthien. There's a weasel that brings, or no, there's two weasels fighting that they see. One bites the other and then gets a herb to heal the other. And then I think it's a crow rather than a raven, but it's a crow or a raven that brings the men as wolves a herb that Sinfiotli can heal Sigmundur with. We hear about the quote vampire, which I had to figure out later. I mean, I kind of wondered if that meant bat. I don't know of any English dialect now or previous that used the word vampire for bat. It's not a native English word. I think it was applied to the undead being before it was ever applied to vampire bats, but it apparently means bat because then we read later about the quote Batfell of Thoringwethiel, off quote Batfell, that of course means bat skin. That word for skin, pelt, hide is used all over Old Norse fjall, Old Norse Fjall. For example, Volander sits on a bear fjall, a bear pelt when he's counting his rings in Volandakvida in the Poetic Edda. Um, Beren and Lúthien go back to Sauron's castle and break in. There's more singing and dancing even there. Um, Lúthien, quote, named her own name, off quote, before Sauron, and I wasn't totally sure um, what that meant it's clearly supposed to be significant, as is when Beren, the page before, says, quote, "Thrice now I curse my oath the Thingol," off quote. I can tell these are supposed to be significant events without quite understanding what significance Tolkien is trying to make and hear in them. To curse an oath strikes me as something that would have, potentially like magical effects in one's doom. I just don't know what exactly to anticipate this would be. Karharoth bites Baron's hand off at the wrists, and once again, like with Maedhros, we have a character losing a hand. This one is even more like Tyr, the Prozetta, losing his hand to the wolf Fenrir. Um, Also done, I suppose, in a sense, in fulfillment of a kind of oath, or at least a an obligation. Um, Clearly, some uh, influence from that story. There is another eagle rescue, and then there is, uh, I really feel like Lord of the Rings, because Tolkien has more normal people talking, you get some better dialogue, but there is some good dialogue in the Silmarillion. And one place you get it is Thingol asking Beren, quote, "What of your quest and of your vow?" But Beren said, "It is fulfilled. Even now a Silmaril is in my hand," off quote. I mean, that's pretty good. That's a pretty good mic drop when you lost a hand in pursuit of these things, but the thing you were pursuing was still in your hand. And then when they take out the hand from the body of Karkaroth and quote, "The hand of Beren that held the jewel was yet incorrupt," off quote. Read a couple medieval saints' lives, you're going to see a lot of that stuff. The body of a saint or somebody else who was cool or virtuous one way or the other is uncorrupted, or the body part is uncorrupted after long periods of time that you would expect something to rot. And then all of the stuff about the afterlife of Beren and Lúthien, I trust Tolkien understands what he's talking about when he contrasts all these different afterlives and places one can go temporarily and permanently. Um, and I'm sure it means a lot to him, to the people who are very invested in Tolkienania, but not very similar, to my knowledge, to anything in ancient medieval literature, and thus not something I can comment on much. Or, frankly, although 100 people will tell me why I'm dumb, understand particularly well. Tolkien has his own ideas, and I'm sure is internally consistent about them. Um, and the very fact that he doesn't spell them out is one of the ways in which he is so much, as I've said before, like a ancient and medieval writer, very different from most modern fantasy and sci-fi writers, and in a way more memorable than they are, because I think that the more dreamlike these stories are, the more that they do stick out in our memory, and the less we remember them as just so stories. Thanks for your support, folks, and for now, for beautiful Colorado, wishing you all the best.